Okay, so we've all seen it. We've all seen Manor Lords, and it looks goddamn incredible. Full medieval village building simulations, researching up through the ages to recruit troops and wage war against other civilizations, almost a Banished meets medieval total war kind of setup. And boy, did it get a good reaction. I think the mass amounts of videos and support being made about this game just says it all. Hundreds of thousands of people flocking to this game that is doing something somewhat similar to what we've seen before, yet adding an entirely new extra layer to the city builder that hasn't been done yet, or at least not with the polish that Manor Lord seems to be doing it to. And this is one developer. But alas, we can hark on all we want about how good it's going to be. At the end of the day, it isn't here yet. And I don't think it will be for a while yet. So what to do? What to do? I know. Let's play something else in the meantime. Something medieval or historical. Something that feels like a well thought out hardcore city builder. I wonder if I can find a game like that. Or maybe 3. My new single, Plead, is out now. Click the link in the description to stream or watch the music video over on the Sahara Line YouTube channel. Ostriv is where we begin. Currently still hard at work, the lone developer started Ostriv as a side hobby back in 2014 and has been crafting it ever since. As far as I'm aware, there are more than just one person on the team now, but when it first started in the very early version, it was just one guy, and it was still just as well thought out and detailed as it is now. Ostriv puts you in the shoes of a governor of an 18th century Ukrainian town. Well, not quite town yet. But the premise sounds quite unique, right? I'm not really sure we've had many games set in this time period, let alone focusing on Eastern Europe aspect of the setting. The game, whilst not as tough as something like Banished, is still one of the more hardcore city builders around this genre though. You're given some citizens to start with and nothing but a few resources and some carts. So, you're just gonna start building, right? Well, not quite. First off, you gotta rush to get some houses up as soon as possible before winter because, when the snowfall comes, your population will just leave or die. I don't know what's worse at this point. And it arrives way sooner than you expect. You gotta get forestry up as soon as possible because it's important to keep the wood coming in order to, start building the houses, but also firewood, otherwise your people are gonna freeze in the winter and once again leave or die. So early game, you may want to go around and find all the stuff to build, like fishing huts, farms, all that sort of stuff. There isn't time for that. You have to focus on houses. Think about food, yes, but really those sparse resources that you have at the start need to be focused into living structures to stop the looming demise of your little town. Whilst food may be an issue at some point, fortunately you're given enough to last out the first winter. But be wary, not quite the second. Fishing docks are one of the best starters. They get food faster than most other sources. You don't have to wait for crops to grow, etc. But you have to make sure you've got a boathouse as well as the fishing house, because of course, you need them to work together. The fishing house needs to order boats from the boathouse, who then need to build the boats with the wood from the forestry, and then give them to the fishing house. There's no magic horse and carts, boats or plows that just randomly appear when you tell someone to start fishing or farming or carrying things. All the tools and utilities need to be made. They have to be ordered and made by one of the select few production buildings. But what about work? Well, work is set out by giving your people jobs, much like a lot of other city builders. However, in Ostriv, it works by opening up a job in that facility and then someone will fill that spot. But be wary, you normally start with around 9 men and 9 women, yet many of the jobs are only open to male workers, things like lumberwork, smithing or fishing. But jobs like farming or weavery, women can also do, so make sure you set your filters to share out the jobs in the most efficient ways possible. In early games, I would run into various issues with there being a job that only men could fill, yet there was no one working there because all of the men were working other jobs. But some of these other jobs could have been filled by women, so management to work is key in order to survive, especially in the early stages when population is somewhat low. But once shelter and food is provided, once you've gained more resources, you can relax a bit. Start thinking about building excess houses that will now attract and be filled up by travellers passing. Now these travellers or childbirth are the 2 main ways that you're going to be expanding your colony, but it will take a lot of patience and time, like with most things in the game. But with this, you can grow your village into a small town and maybe even eventually a little city with hundreds of civilians and colonists farming, mining, fishing, building and of course trading. Yes, trading, you are not alone in this world. There are other towns set up around and you have the option to trade with them, setting up trade stores and people will come and buy things, materials or food or even livestock, so you can start your own cattle or chicken farms. It's all through the trading aspects, and this is how you make all your money throughout the game. Now overall, there's certain things like governments and religion that are still being worked on, and there are plenty more additions that are coming in soon as the developer is moving forward with the game, but it's still very much early in development. But I would say even what you get right now is worth the £20 price point on Steam. And of course, it will only gain value throughout time. So if you need something to tide you over, Ostriv may be the one. Moving on to Foundation, a somewhat similar game to Ostriv, but with a completely different art style. Yes, it has that more cartoony feel, yet still keeps a realistic nature within its mechanics throughout. Unlike a game like Ostriv though, where you can just start settling, you've got to pick a segment to start your village. Each segment has the resources that you're going to need to start your colony. Now, you can buy extra bits of land later on to move into once you have the coin, but that coin may take a while to get, and it may take some time before you can afford extra land, because they're quite pricey, boys. Like most city builders, the game starts with assigning your villagers jobs, whether that's being a forester, a lumberjack, a miner, a forager, carpenter, and so on. Now, it's safe to say that with all these games, you can go anywhere from a small hamlet to a sprawling city across the countryside if you know what you're doing. But I would say this has never been more true than it is with the game Foundation. You see, whilst being similar to other city builds, it isn't quite as hardcore. There are difficulties, yes, getting a good amount of food and housing at the beginning, but really, passers-by are always constantly joining. You'll actually find out that you're going to be trading a lot of your food because you're going to have a lot of it, especially once you've been playing for an hour or so. And money eventually starts coming pretty easily once you have an abundance of resources that you can then have trading set up and on the go. But because of this slightly easier playstyle, Foundation gives the players opportunity to build absolutely massive kingdoms. Yes, I mean kingdoms. These are much more like medieval regions than just towns or cities when it gets to the late game. Hundreds, if not sometimes thousands of citizens, all doing different jobs, farms covering hills like a carpet, and new paths being made in every direction, snaking like a spider's web across the countryside. It is a sight to see later on in the game. Now, missions are a big part of this game, unlike something like Ostriv. You're going to be sent monks and envoys to talk to you once you have a Lord's Manor set up. These guys are going to ask you for resources for 3 different groups: the king, the church, or the commoners. Of course, you have a choice. You can decide who you want to help, who you want to send those resources to, and these could have advantageous or adverse effects later on down the line. Most of the time, they're going to ask for food or resources, gifts in return for favour, or just plain good old money. But who doesn't love a good bit of money? Later on in gameplay, you're going to send some envoys and men yourself to interact with neighbouring kingdoms, and this is where troops come in. For most of city builders that I've played and looked into, Foundation is one of the only ones that really brings soldiers into it, perhaps making it so far the closest relative to Manor Lords that we've seen. Recruiting and training soldiers gives the possibilities to complete different missions sent by the envoys. You're going to mostly find these guys standing guard, patrolling, and training with dummies in their spare time. But unfortunately, that's about as far as the army aspect goes in Foundation. It's a bit, I guess, shallow, for lack of a better word. And I know what you're thinking. And no, you can't actually go to war yet. You can't build these massive armies and attack new regions or other cities like everyone knows you want to do. And these soldiers pretty much just help you with missions, and that's about it. I know, it's a little bit disappointing, but this may change in the future. Now they've added in soldiers, hopefully now Foundation is still in development, we're going to be getting some bigger armies and maybe some battles later on, but at the moment they're a little bit useless. But aside from that, Foundation is a great fun game. Perhaps the one to start with if you're not so experienced in city builders and you don't want to jump into one of the more hardcore ones just yet. Now, we don't know for sure which side of relaxing or hardcore Manor Lords is going to fall, but I suspect it's going to be more the latter. So you better get your practice in now. And finally, the last game you should play whilst waiting for Manor Lords is Banished. I mean, we all knew it was coming. It seems to be the Kickstarter for all these historical-based city builders. Unlike some of the games we've looked at, Banished is a little different. It's very open-ended compared to something like Foundation. I mean, Banished doesn't have any of these missions or story, and to be fair, there's no real way that you're pointed in. You're just thrust into the world and off you go. Try to survive. Speaking of surviving, you're going to be doing a lot of that, and for a good while, before you even start to thrive. And in fact, out of most of the games, Banished is one that you could probably go a full few hours and never start to thrive because of, well, what you'll see now. Banished is more of the granddaddy for hardcore survival city builders, and there's a good reason why. Cold, disease, starvation, terribly unlucky events. If it exists, it will affect your colony. And this is why you'll probably be surviving for your whole gameplay and never start to actually thrive. Most of the time it's a tug of war to try and stop your villagers from starving within the first hour or so. Plant crops, then the winter comes and the crops die. Everyone's dead. And it's just a vicious cycle. For anyone that hasn't played the game, let me put this difficulty in perspective for you. I loaded up a game to record this footage for the video, and within 30 seconds a tornado comes in and kills half my population and destroys the surrounding resources. What a great start! Even tiny things like removing resources to gather have to be well thought out and not rushed. I mean, when I started, I clicked to collect resources in a big space thinking I need all those rocks and trees, I'd just get as many as possible, and it was too big. I didn't notice how preoccupied my citizens were chopping down trees, mining stone. That meant there was no one there to go fishing or farming, and you guessed it, my guys just died. But as I mentioned, this is one of the more unique and perhaps refreshing things about Banished, and it's the lack of research tree. If you want to build something, the only limitations are the resources and labour. You don't have to wait to gain XP or build new buildings in order to unlock the next set of production or residential items. It's all just there. And it's a good job, because that may be the only saving grace for new players when loading up this game. Overall though, the game has a gorgeous aesthetic. The rugged art style holds up even to this day, and yeah, it was released in 2014, but I don't think it looks a day older. The paths running through the houses, the way the AI work really helps build the feel of a living, breathing world. Well, until you actually play the game and there's a distinct lack of living and breathing throughout Banished. But out of all of them, Banished is probably the most developed and polished. I think it's done in development now, so if you want a full game, this is the one to go for. Ostriv may be my favourite at the moment, but it still has a bit of work to do when it comes to usability with the UI and extra content. And of course there's Foundation. This is the one that I go to when I just want to chill out, play a little city builder with no stress, no worries, and definitely no tornadoes. But I genuinely can't wait for Manor to be released. But perhaps these are enough to tide me over until then. With these incredible games to play, while we wait for Manor.